Before we start today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. The content in this podcast is for general reference and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be complete or exhaustive or to be applicable to any specific individual's medical condition. No information provided in this podcast constitutes medical advice and is not an attempt to practice medicine or to provide specific medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please do not rely on this podcast for emergency medical treatment. Remember that everyone is different, so make sure you consult your own healthcare professional before seeking any new treatment and before you alter, suspend, or initiate a new change in your routine. Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Schuetz,
two internal medicine doctors who spent years practicing traditional primary care. Over time, we realized something was missing from modern healthcare. A real understanding of how everyday lifestyle choices impact overall health.
We'll help you cut through the noise of the countless health influencers and their conflicting opinions. Because no matter who you follow, the basics of lifestyle medicine are at the heart of it all.
Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Schuetz.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed this little bump in temperature that we've had here in Lexington over the last week. And hopefully you participated in our weekly challenge last week, which was to get outside and walk for a mile every day. Being able to do that, especially when the weather perked up a little bit, was really helpful for me and especially for my mental health, which we're going to get back to talking about today.
Today, we're going to focus a lot more on anxiety because we know that tends to run high this time of year for many people. We did a show a couple weeks ago with a psychiatrist, Dr. Leslie Oslam, where we really talked about the winter blues and seasonal affective disorder. But today, we really wanted to dive into those feelings of anxiety and stress and feelings of just being overwhelmed that some of us may be having this time of year as well. And we're really excited to have our guest today, Dr. Jennifer Degler. I personally know her. She is my psychologist and has helped me through some challenging times in my life. Without her, I don't think I would have survived the pandemic. So I'm very, very grateful for all that she's done for me. And we're just excited to have her give her perspective and tips and tricks with dealing with a lot of these things that you may be feeling this time of year. So I'm going to pause and let her introduce herself and tell us how she got into her current profession.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I am a clinical psychologist at the Interfaith Counseling Center in Lexington, and I've been in practice now for, 30 years. And over time, I just really realized I really love working with anxious people because they're highly motivated. They are usually people who like to get things done. So if you had to choose a psychological disorder to have, you ought to pick anxiety because it is so treatable, which makes it fun to be somebody that treats that because you see people get better. So over time, that's just been something that I really enjoy working in that area and helping men and women.
That's really interesting. I'd never thought about it that way. But yes, an anxious person is probably more motivated to follow through with recommendations that you're giving them. So we thought today we'd do it a little bit differently and just let me throw a few questions and scenarios that I think come up a lot and see where we go from there. Let's say you have a patient that is coming in to see you and they tell you, I have a million things on my mind all the time. I'm trying to keep track of everything going on at work. I'm trying to keep track of everything going on in our house and keep it at least somewhat presentable. I'm keeping track of everything for my kids, trying to think about what we're going to eat for dinner, trying to make sure I've got soccer scheduled and dance scheduled and everything else. And my mind is thinking about things all the time. And I look forward to a weekend night where I can have a glass or two of wine and finally let my mind rest.
So a couple of red flags there. Of course, one is having a couple of glasses of wine. Typically in our field, we're like, whatever they tell you they're consuming, you need to double it. That's actually what they're consuming. So I'm immediately going to be wondering, okay, is their anxiety at such a level that they're now self-medicating? So that's one little red flag that popped up. But overall, let's say this is someone that is I'd say just the average parent these days who is feeling so overwhelmed with everything that there is to do. And what I would encourage them to do is to do some reflection, and this would be something as a counselor that we would talk through. Is the anxiety because they actually have an anxiety disorder? So no matter what their schedule is like, that anxiety is going to grab a hold of things, put them in an enlarging machine, and make all kinds of what-ifs hijack their brain. And then there would be a course of treatment we would follow if that was true. But for many folks, it's not that they have an anxiety disorder. It's that literally there is too much on their plate. They've been so busy just trying to do the next thing that they've not actually set aside time to really look at what they have put on their plate. And typically there aren't bad things, but if I were to give you a plate and it had 12 ribeyes on it and I said, enjoy, I mean, you would be overwhelmed. Like, no, I will take one steak, but if you tell me to eat 12 steaks, that's just too much of a good thing. And so for many of us, we have too much of a good thing on our schedule. And we're thinking, well, this is no big deal. I'll just add this. Oh, well, she wanted me to run her here. I'll just run her here. And many times for that person, they are overscheduled because they do not disappoint people enough. And so they end up just disappointing themselves. And I believe the body doesn't lie. And your body will tell you whether your schedule is so overpacked that you are pretty much in a state of hypervigilance all of the time. And if you need a glass of wine to help your brain finally shift from that fight versus flight response into a relaxation response, it's worth really considering whether you have created a life that does not actually work. And the only way it even happens is at very great cost to you.
And so let's say someone says, okay, it's number 2. When I go on vacation and we don't have these things going on, I'm able to relax. I'm not worrying about things. So I'm probably in the overscheduled category. Where does that person start?
I think they start by taking time. And this is where it can be helpful to have somebody to work through this with you so you're accountable to actually do this, because your first thought is going to be, well, I don't have time to do this.
Exactly.
But you actually, put on your calendar, I am taking Saturday morning from 9 to 12. I'm going to leave my house. I'm going to maybe go to the library or go somewhere, coffee shop, whatever. And I'm going to actually write down, here is what I am expecting myself to do in a month. In a given day, I drive somebody here, I pick somebody up here, I do this, I expect this, and to really truly lay it all out. And when you see it, it is amazing how sometimes your eyes are open to like, I would not wish this on my worst enemy. And I am expecting myself to do all of these things. And usually it is making other people's lives full and exciting. Meanwhile, your own life is getting smaller and smaller. There's no time to go exercise. There's no time to actually sit down and eat your lunch. You eat your lunch, you eat your breakfast standing up. There's no time to just, have sex with your spouse and actually enjoy it. Or go have lunch with a friend. Because you're working so hard to make everyone else's life interesting or helpful. And that could be if you have kids. It could be if you're in that stage of elder care where you just look up. And so that's why making yourself do that, it can be helpful to have another person there to give you perspective on, is this even realistic? Because it's if you're a people pleaser, and a lot of people that struggle with this kind of anxiety and overwhelm tend to be people pleasers, they need help and support in disappointing other people. So that's the start. The start is actually being honest about saying, oh my goodness, look what I have created, taking ownership of it because you were the one that said yes to all of those things on your calendar, and then being willing, once you've taken a good look at it, to look and say, who do I need to start disappointing? Who is asking for my time, my attention, my energy? I always encourage people to use the 4 Ds when they're looking at their schedule. The first one is do it. And those are those things on your schedule that only you can do. Only you can take yourself to the gym and work your body. Only you can take your teeth to the dentist and get them cleaned. Unless you have dentures, I guess. You could send them. I don't know. But there's only you can have sex with your spouse. I mean, there are certain things that only you can do, and they need to go on your schedule first. The second D is delegate it. And those are things on your schedule that someone else could do. So maybe you need to hire somebody to help clean your house. I'm amazed at the number of women in particular who are working a full-time job and have children at home and still expect themselves to clean their house. Or you need to really lower your expectations for what your house is going to look like or what meal prep is going to look like. Your children can probably do a lot more than you think they can do, and it would actually be really good for them to have that responsibility. Or, for example, let's say your elderly mother doesn't want to ever ask her friends to give her a ride because she doesn't want to look needy, and so she always just calls you and says, well, can you run me here and can you run me there? You need to be able to say to her, there are other people in your life you could ask. And yeah, that might make her uncomfortable, but that's just part of owning your own life. But sometimes we need to tell other people, you're going to have to delegate this to someone else. I'm not the only person who could do this. And the third D is to dump it. And those are those things on your schedule that you could dump, you could get rid of. And I encourage particularly families that have children that are involved in a lot of activities. There may be activities that you need to we're not going to do that travel team anymore. It is making our family move at such a frantic pace that it's just not good for us. And so when your child comes and says, okay, I know I'm already playing soccer and I've got violin and now I'd like to do, the math team, to be willing to say, I regret that I have to disappoint you, but we cannot add that to our schedule. Or expectations that you're putting on yourself that you could just dump. Maybe there's this project where you're like, I have got to scrapbook all of my photos. Maybe you could just dump that and leave them in a laundry basket, all those photos. And I can tell you because that's where my photos are. And they're fine. I mean, I know now people have photos on their phone, but I'm old enough that we used to print, photos. And then the last D is detach from it. And those are the things on your schedule that you can't really do it. You can't really delegate it. You can't really dump it. But it is just taking a lot of emotional energy from you and adding to your anxiety. And what can you do to emotionally detach from that? So that may be some unrealistic expectations. That may be an unhealthy relationship. Just different things where, again, this is where it can be helpful to talk to a counselor or talk to a trusted friend, a mentor, about things that are adding to your anxiety because you're so emotionally invested in something that really you need to practice maybe some benevolent detachment towards that thing. So that's the process. Starts with writing down the truth of what your schedule is and what you've put on your plate, and then being willing to go through with those 4 Ds.
That was fantastic.
It was. I think probably most people listening need to do that.
And based off that, say someone goes through this process or they upfront already know, maybe I'm dealing with something that's more than this, and I am having concerns that I have generalized anxiety disorder. What are some of those key features that people should pay attention to and think maybe I need to go get more professional help?
Well, so much of this has to do with the amount of worrying that you're doing. So generally people, what we would just call healthy people, we hate to use the word normal in psychology, but we're just going to use the word normal. So normally folks might worry maybe, 10% of the time, maybe 20% of the time if something truly, if a pandemic's going on, something like that. But when you're realizing about 50% of the time I am worrying, I'm having a lot of what if thoughts, and they spiral. And when they spiral, I start feeling really unpleasant physical sensations, and they just get worse. And then I see scary images and whatnot. And you realize, okay, this is debilitating to me. This is affecting my sleep. Maybe you develop irritable bowel syndrome, backaches. There's a lot of physical manifestations of worry that has gotten out of control. Looking at the criteria, there's specific criteria for it, but I would just encourage people to ask the people in their life, do you think worry is robbing me of joy? Because the people that live with you and around you, they're good at measuring. We as human beings are not good at detecting when we're flipping out. We think, I'm fine, I'm just doing fine. And meanwhile, you and I, we're good at detecting when other people are flipping out, when other people are stressed out, when other people are being mastered by anxiety. But we have a very hard time detecting that in ourselves. So it's so helpful just to ask people and to try and have a receptive spirit and to not get defensive about that. And I will say, irritability is a symptom of anxiety. We tend to think that anxiety, we have this stereotypical picture that it's like this little gray-haired grandma and she's standing at the window, peeking out the window. Oh, is there going to be an ice storm? And her voice is quavering and whatnot. And that is sometimes what worry looks like. But you can be somebody who's eaten up with worry and actually be a pretty quiet person. Or maybe it shows up as a lot of irritability, feeling on edge, feeling keyed up, feeling that sensation in your body of hypervigilance. All of those things can be indicators that, this is something I probably need to go and get treated. And as I said, it's very treatable.
Another thing that I've heard in practice is many people don't consider that they possibly have generalized anxiety if they're still functioning and doing their daily activities. Mm-hmm. I know that's how creeped up on me. And I think that is something to point out is there are many people that maybe are struggling with this, but they're still functioning and they may just be more irritable or having these other changes. So I think that's a really good point for our listeners to latch on to, because I know that's one thing of how I noticed it mostly, because still able to go to work, still doing all the things, just not yourself. Mm-hmm. And people notice it.
Exactly. And that's such a good point. That's one of the reasons why it's treatable is that, like, for instance, if we were to take like a clinical depression, which is still treatable, but oftentimes the symptoms of that are lack of initiative and maybe the vegetative symptoms, I can't get out of bed. And so you may be more functionally impaired with some emotional conditions as compared to anxiety. And anxious people can get some stuff done because their anxiety, a lot of times they are running on adrenaline. They are running on anxiety and stress hormones. So they can be very rewarded in our society because they're so productive. They're always saying yes, and they're getting a lot of stuff done, which then is its own kind of reinforcing cycle. So it's being willing to take the time to check in with yourself and say, yeah, I'm getting a lot done, but I am not happy. My body feels bad, and I'm not sleeping well. It's leaking out of me, maybe with passive-aggressive behaviors and irritability and whatnot. Or I've got headaches all the time, or all this tension. I'm grinding my teeth at night. Those sorts of things. So being willing to recognize I don't have to be ready to be psychiatrically hospitalized before I go and recognize this is an issue.
Agree. And I think that's missed by so many people, and not realizing the amount of improvement in their quality of life that you can have just by seeking care.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned sleep, or you're having trouble sleeping. I think I heard that a lot from patients. They probably had anxiety. I don't know if they were ignoring it during the day or they were just so busy during the day, but it seemed like when it would really hit them would be, finally, it's time to lay in bed. Things are still, and everything's still except their mind. And their minds can't seem to stop running through everything that happened in the day, everything that's on their to-do list. What do you suggest to those people whose minds don't stop when their body does at night?
Well, of course, what I've already suggested, doing that, but recognizing if you are running on hypervigilance, so you're what we call hyperarousal, and I don't mean sexual arousal. I just mean that your nervous system is ready to fight the bear, and so that stress response is activated. You're going to have a level of stress hormones in your body that will make it hard to sleep. Like there's just chemicals in your body that are still there. If you've just had something very frightening happen to you, you're not sleepy. Right? You're filled with adrenaline. And so oftentimes we've been pushing ourselves so fast and so hard that our body hasn't had time to downshift. And for those, the adrenal glands are still pumping out that adrenaline and those hormones. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, there may be this is another kind of little part of anxiety to look at, is that sometimes people are anxious because the anxiety is serving them. So there may be something in their life that they're avoiding. And when I treat people for anxiety, I always ask them, what are you avoiding? And they may have this thing over here they're worried about. Like, I'm worried about my child's health. And their child isn't actually dealing with any health issues, but that's the worry. That's where the anxiety has landed, is, well, what if my child gets sick? And what if? But there may be way over here something that they're avoiding. Like, let's say actually their marriage is in trouble. And so the anxiety serves the purpose of distracting you from the real thing that you're avoiding, which is dealing with this trouble in your marriage. And so at night, sometimes what will happen is our defenses are down. And so some of that worry comes back up, and maybe we'll even begin to actually kind of think about the thing over here, the marriage. But then all of a sudden, we're like, oh, I'm trying to avoid that. And here comes, well, what if Johnny gets mumps and is sterile his whole life? What if his immunization didn't work? So the anxiety is not going to go away because it's serving the purpose of distracting you from this thing over here. So if you're having trouble going to sleep, it's always helpful to, when you're awake, do some thinking through of, what am I avoiding in my life? And how is this anxiety serving me? And then, of course, the other piece is there are definitely techniques you can do to help shut your mind down. But I find when I'm working with folks and I give them those techniques, and then they come back and they report, I've tried that, but it's not working. Then I'm like, okay, then let's talk about how this anxiety is serving you and what are you avoiding? Because the anxiety is not going to go away if it's actually doing something for you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it definitely does.
In this bucket of getting your mind to shut off at night, any other simple tools that you recommend for people to try?
Well, the Calm app is a great app to use. And I think people can get a free trial for maybe 2 weeks if they want to give it a try. And it is so full of resources. There are stories that you can listen to, nighttime stories, because typically people that struggle with anxiety, they have what I call a hungry brain. It wants to chew on something. So we want to make sure we give it something pretty neutral to chew on. And so you can listen to these stories. You may enjoy the breathing exercises that they have on there. But thinking about, my brain just produces more thoughts than the average brain. And that's, anxious people tend to be highly imaginative, deeply empathetic, deeply feeling people. They are some of the loveliest people you'll ever meet, which is, again, why I love working with them. They're just like really great people. But recognizing, okay, I'm going to have to feed my brain is still probably a little hungry when it's time to go to bed. And I need to be thinking about what I'm feeding it. So I don't need to be looking at my news feed. I don't probably need to be looking at social media. I actually probably need to just maybe feed it a story to listen to or some quiet music to listen to give it something so that I can gradually transition into sleep. So that's a great app for folks to get. They can also, it's got progressive muscle relaxation techniques on there, lots of resources.
I personally like the adult bedtime stories and have used those from time to time. I don't deal with as much issues with sleep as I used to, but I found that the easiest for me to focus on that voice versus sometimes the more relaxing music. Mm-hmm. Just as you spoke of, your brain is just so active, it's wanting to focus on something. Music sometimes wasn't enough to relax it. But if I listened to a bedtime story and was paying attention, and that soothing voice would help me gradually fall asleep. So highly recommend those.
And for someone that maybe isn't struggling so much with like anxiety and worries, but maybe more in the overscheduled person that's just constantly going through their to-do list and things, do you recommend journaling or writing that down? Or do you think like writing down your to-do list before bed is helpful? Or do you think that keeps you up? How do you recommend that person deal with it?
I would encourage them to just notice what happens in them, because everybody is different. And for some folks, they may notice, okay, after I write my to-do list, I feel better. I sleep better. Other people may find that they feel more activated. For those folks, they may do better writing a to-done list. So this is what I got done today. And that feels good to make a list of everything you did that day, particularly if you're the kind of person who's always thinking, I could have been more productive. I should have been more productive. You write a to-done list. But part of this recovery process, whether you're overscheduled or you actually have an anxiety disorder, is reconnecting with your body and noticing what is coming up in you. Just like, you noticed, okay, when I listen to these stories, that helps me transition to sleep more easily than listening to music. That doesn't mean listening to stories is better than listening to music for everybody. It's about noticing what's happening inside of you. And many times when someone's been anxious for a while, they're very disconnected from their body because anxiety, whether you're overscheduled or you have an anxiety disorder, it makes your body uncomfortable. And when our bodies are uncomfortable, if we can't get away from that, we just start disconnecting from that. So learning to notice, what am I sensing in my body? What emotions are coming up in me? You get to be like a little scientist, a little detective when you're the only person you're noticing. And then that'll help you make wiser decisions about what you need, what your specific unique body needs to go into more of a relaxation response.
I think that's great, being your own detective, because while meditation may work well for one person, yoga might work well for someone else, and listening to like high volume rock music may be better for someone else. So kind of figuring that out and just doing different trials. But I think a lot of times we can do things and then not really pay attention to how that made us feel. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just whatever you do decide to try, reflect on how that worked for you and whether you need to try something else or not.
Yes.
So I think we'll move on to our next common scenario here. One that we hear a lot. I feel overwhelmed frequently, and I know that taking time for myself to actually relax or be social or making time for exercise would help me. I'm aware of that, but I always find myself just doing stuff for everyone else in my family instead. And I always seem to prioritize getting those things done for everyone else, and I just cannot get anything on the calendar for me.
So common. And I think some of that comes with having ovaries. We just, as women in particular, I know men can struggle with that too, but in particular, just because of the way women are raised in our culture and the way we're socialized, it is not about, would that feel good to you? You ought to do it. So I would encourage people, women in particular, but men and women, to think about their self-care practices as like getting chemo. If you were diagnosed with cancer and you needed a regimen of chemo, you would make it happen. You would absolutely make it happen. You would disappoint other people. You would inconvenience other people. You would do what, right? I see you all nodding your
Absolutely.
heads.
Yes. There's no question.
There's no question. To realize, wow, I am treating the care of my body and brain, my mind, body, and soul, me. I'm treating me like it's optional, sort of like cleaning your baseboards. You don't really have to do that.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I usually only get my baseboards clean like when I'm putting off doing something else and I don't want to do it. And I'm like, oh, those baseboards, they need to be wiped down. So, but realizing, okay, I need to, when I look at my schedule, I need to put me in first. And for many of us, that can feel really selfish. Like that is like wrong to do that. But you're the only one that can do it. Nobody else, you're in charge of that. So when you think about your week, you're like, well, I am going to get my daily walk in. Or I know I go to Orange Theory Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8:30. And will have to watch myself because I'll look up and somebody will want something and it'll be at, 9:30, which means I can't make my class at 8:30. And I'm like, no, Jennifer, that comes first. You want to be a strong old woman, and I'm 59 now. I have to do that so that I am not on a walker, because my grandmother lived to be 100. The women in my family usually live a really long time. So saying, okay, I am going to treat this, whether that's I want every 2 weeks to have lunch with a friend, or I want a date with my spouse, or whatever it might be. And you put that on your calendar first. And when people ask, well, can you do this? Don't tell them, well, that's when I go work out. Or, well, I'm supposed to go on a date with my husband, because then they'll think it's negotiable. Just tell them, oh, I have an appointment. Now, you have an appointment with yourself. You don't tell them that. You just say, I have an appointment. And people usually respect appointments. Oh, you have an appointment. Okay, you have an appointment. Otherwise, they're going to push against it. Like, well, can't you skip your workout for today? And so begin to really think, like, that goes on first. And you expect everyone else to, like, work around it versus you being somebody who always works around everybody else. And over time, it just becomes it's just a habit, and it's part of your life, and it gets easier. The feelings of I'm being selfish, they will lessen, because overall you feel better. You're less irritable. The people in your house like you more. You like you more. You're physically stronger. You're getting sick less because you're doing those healthy habits. So over time, it begins to pay off. So that's what I would encourage people to do. It really does mean a change in the way you think about this. It's not enough to just like, well, I'm not going to change my thinking. I'm just going to add this to my calendar, because you will schedule over it. And you'll be like, well, I don't have time to do that. I still have to, like this morning with recording this podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, can I do Orange Theory? And because I'm working on a project, and I just was like, no, you're going to do both of those things. That is really important. Be a strong old woman. And so I went to Orange Theory and did my workout, which is why I have no makeup on.
You still look fabulous.
I know,
well, thank you.
do.
And
thank you.
You look strong.
Yes. Would you like to see my muscles? Yes.
Well, that kind of ties into multiple things, I think, that we talk about. But one thing we talked about recently was how to set New Year's resolutions and how to actually stick with them and make them happen. And I think what you're talking about is a big reason why people don't stick with them. You hear a lot about self-sabotage. I've heard that that's the most common reason that people fail is self-sabotage. And I never really thought about that, but I think maybe I'm connecting it to what you're saying with you're maybe not even just wanting to take the time to reflect to figure out how you make that happen, because you may disappoint someone else if you're adding this new resolution into your life. Am I getting that right?
You are right on. It's that whole idea of where am I getting in my own way? And typically what we do is we think, well, I need more self-discipline. And if I just was a better person, I would just want to go to the gym, or I would want to eat healthier foods. And then we just end up beating up on ourselves and shaming ourselves. And then that just makes us want to eat that whole bag of Oreos and lay on the couch and watch Netflix. So instead to be like, okay, how am I thinking about this? And what are the emotions that come up in me when I think about taking care of myself? Because we will self-sabotage if we know every time we look at somebody and say, I can't do that because I have an appointment, and then they look sad or they look mad or disappointed, and then we feel this sense of guilt inside us and like, oh, I've just done a bad thing, then we're going to sabotage our good New Year's resolution to keep that appointment with ourselves, to take that walk. So really, we have to think about what emotions come up in me, and how do I need to develop a new relationship with those emotions, because nobody ever died from feeling guilty. It will pass, I promise you. And over time, you just have a new relationship and with those feelings, and you feel them less, and you also can begin to see that, wow, there's some things there that I needed to delegate to that person, or I needed to dump. These are some things they could do themselves, or someone else could do it. And I'm going to stop disappointing myself all the time. I always tell people, if you're not regularly disappointing people, you probably are losing yourself in other people's lives. Now, I don't mean like you're committing crimes. But I mean, like, if you're not disappointing people in terms of they're asking for some of your time, your attention, your money, whatever it might be, and you don't occasionally disappoint some people, you may be out of balance there.
That's a great reflection question.
Yeah, it is.
Something that is also lots of buzz, I would say, on social media nowadays about this, and I would love to hear your expert thoughts, is we see a lot of talk about managing your nervous system and different techniques for that, and lots of information about breathing exercises. Can you just explain how those are used in these scenarios and how they can help and why they may help?
That's a great question. And also when they're not going to help.
Right.
Because what we're trying to do is we're trying with the breath to calm down the limbic system. So that's the middle of your brain. Your deep limbic system includes your amygdala, which is sitting right on top of your brain stem, so it's very low in your brain, and that's kind of like the threat detector in your brain that's always scanning for danger. And so because breathing is controlled by your brain stem, or your reptilian brain, whatever you want to call it, normally you don't even think about it. You just breathe. But if you're anxious, you're probably holding your breath. And so we can consciously control our breathing. And if we can make ourselves breathe in certain ways, the amygdala, it's a little hack. The amygdala is like, oh, well, I was really worried about that, but she's breathing like everything's okay. So I guess we're not in danger. So we'll stop sending a message up to the hypothalamus to send out the stress response. And then you calming down your brain. So it's a hack to hack that system when that stress response is overactive. But if you are totally flipped out, like caught way down in an anxiety spiral, and your mind is racing 1,000,000 miles an hour, and your heart is pounding, and you're sweating, and you're dizzy, and then you're like, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to breathe. It's probably not going to help, because the breathing exercises work best to stop an anxiety spiral in the beginning, to kind of nip it in the bud, to quote Barney Fife, nip it in the bud.
Love that one.
I find for me, because I've just been kind of trying some of these over the last year, I'd say, is one thing that really drives me crazy is hearing my kids whine about something that's insignificant or them arguing over something that's insignificant. And I don't know why, but that sets me off. And I just immediately feel like, and if I do some deep breathing, that helps me so much in that particular situation. And then I can be calm and not let it bother me, because really they're just kids doing normal kid things, and it's okay for them to whine and bicker at each other. I just need to control myself and not let it bother me.
Well, and that it's okay that it bothers you. Of course, nobody likes whining. I mean, it's so annoying. So being bothered is not the issue. It's like that you were able, though, to go, I am bothered now. This is like jacking me up a little bit. I need to calm myself down before I don't want to avoid this, and I also don't want to get in there and start yelling at them, but saying, okay, I am bothered. This makes sense that I'm bothered. And now what can I do to calm my nervous system down so that I can think logically about what do we do next? Do we need to separate them? What do we need to do? So yeah, breathing at the beginning. That's so cool that you noticed that and that you could do the breathing. And, I love a physiological sigh. That is the quickest hack to calming down your nervous system. And that is where you breathe in until you think you can't take in any more air. And then you, without exhaling, you take one more sip of air. And then you slowly exhale. And that is such an unusual way of breathing. That's not how we normally breathe. That it kind of makes your nervous system go, what's she doing? That's weird. Oh, okay. And it helps that nervous system begin to down-regulate. Little side note, if you have the hiccups, you can get rid of the hiccups by adding 2 sips of air. So you breathe in as much as you can until you think your lungs are full. You take one more sip of air, and then you take a second sip of air. And that is such an unusual pattern that it stops that diaphragmatic spasm that a hiccup is. So there you go.
Oh,
no extra charge
bonus.
For that one.
That is a big bonus.
I am like a strong believer in drinking upside down to get rid of hiccups. And so I'm really looking forward to trying this one.
You know what? And that is like being waterboarded. That was my technique for like the first 57 years of my life. And then I discovered this. I'm like, and it really works. That's taking that, because it's an unusual breathing pattern. There's other techniques. You can do box breathing, where you breathe in for the count of 4, you hold for the count of 4, you release for the count of 4, and then you rest and don't do anything for the count of 4. So it's like 4 equal sides of a square. Sometimes it helps folks to trace that square with their finger, or in their mind imagine making a square. And it just, again, it gives your mind something to do and something to chew on while you're doing the breathing. And that breathing is helping hack that nervous system and calm you down. These techniques work the best at the beginning of a worry spiral, not all the way at the bottom. All the way at the bottom is when it's helpful to use rescue techniques.
Another time that I've found breathing exercises very helpful is that transition from a work day that may have been like heightened for whatever reason, could be for good reason, for stress, and then before adjusting going into the house where I need to kind of separate work from home, and calming the nervous system with some breathing exercises. I found that very helpful as well, because it's like telling my body, that is done.
Yes.
It's time to move on to a different scenery and scenario at this point.
Yes. And I love how you were noticing that your body needed a transition, some time to let it do that. So that's being a friend to your body and letting your body be a friend to you, versus just expecting. I can be talking on the phone all the way home, managing a case with a patient, and then literally I'm talking right up until I get to my front door, and then I open my front door, and I'm now supposed to be totally open to what's going on in my house. You have been unkind to yourself if you do that, versus what you're doing.
I think you taught me that. But learning to do that transition for any listeners that experience that tension from your job, and having a routine to kind of separate work is over, now I'm home, can be very helpful in that switch of your nervous system.
Yes.
Any other suggestions just as far as things people can do on a regular basis to keep that nervous system a little lower? Do you see good success with people who start trying yoga or Tai Chi or mindfulness or any of that stuff?
All of those things are great. And it's interesting. I saw one time where someone was explaining that yoga is actually about breathing. It is all about breathing, and there's a series of poses around breathing. So, I mean, it's great to stretch and do your body in the yoga poses, but what's really, really helpful is that when you're doing yoga poses, you cannot think about anything else, or you will fall over on your behind, right? Because you got to keep your balance and your concentrate. They keep reminding you of your breath. So all of those things become very helpful, whether it's Tai Chi, mindfulness, meditation. Some folks are a little suspicious of meditation, but if you can worry, you're already meditating. You're just meditating on really scary thoughts. So guess what? You're really good at meditation. It's just we can choose something different for you to meditate on. And so again, just noticing what works for you, for what your life is like, what your schedule is like, what your finances are like, what really works for you. I'm not a big journaler, but for some people that is huge for them. So I like to present people with this buffet of things they can try, and to try them, and not just try it one time, but really give it a good college try, and then notice what happened when you tried that. And then you'll find what works for you. There is something that will help your body. I promise you that.
Another thing that I have noticed a lot of information coming out is regarding the benefits of being outside. How does that help our mental health?
That's a great question. There's a lot of research showing the impact of a green space on a brain. My adult son, has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's fascinating to see how getting outside helps him. And when he was a kid, he would come home from school and he would pace the creek. We have a creek in our backyard, and he would just get out there and go back and forth, walk up and down. And you could tell it was just helping his brain get in a better place, because he had been working so hard at school. And then that was before the research even came out, looking at what being outside does to the human brain. And so whenever you can get outside, when you can get in sunlight, when you can, unfortunately for a lot of us, that is not what our day is like. And actually vitamin D is related to that, because the majority of American adults are deficient in vitamin D. And when you're deficient, one of the symptoms is anxiety. So that's a very simple thing people can do, is start taking a vitamin D supplement. Get it at Walmart, super cheap, and take at least 1,000 or 2,000 units a day. And when you see your doctor, ask them to check your vitamin D level, because you may need more than that, and that can help with anxiety. But certainly getting outside, and typically when we're outside, we're moving as well. So thinking about, how can I get more movement in my life? How can I be outside more? Because it just does something to the nervous system to help it regulate. And combining being outside with movement is especially helpful. So even a little on your lunch hour, you can fit in just maybe a 10-minute walk.
And it can be an appointment.
Yes. Yes. I have a 10-minute appointment. Yes. And while you're outside, think about, is this really the time when you need to call that annoying relative back and have a conversation that's going to stress you out? No. What could you be doing? Is there a fun podcast you want to listen to that makes you laugh? Is there some music you'd like to listen to? Do you just want, I love silence. Do you want to take a walk? One thing that's really helpful for anxiety is becoming more aware of your senses. So as you walk, you make it a sensory walk, and you go through each of your senses. So you might start with, all right, I'm going to name things that I see. I see a mailbox and it's blue. I see a tree and it's green and its leaves are starting to turn. Then, all right, what are some things that I hear? I hear the car driving past me. I hear the leaves crunching under my feet. What are some things that I smell? You may have to pick a leaf up or something, or smell your hand. What are some things that I smell? Can you smell anything in the air? What do you sense with your body? So that would be the touch sense. I feel the hardness of the pavement under my shoes. I feel the coolness of that breeze against my face. And then what can I taste? Which that may be a little harder to do. But you're pulling yourself back into the land of what is with your 5 senses. Because most of the time when we're anxious and worried and we're in the land of what if, we're not okay in the future. But most of the time in the current moment, in the land of what is, we're fine. We're warm, we're fed, we're dry. We're fine. And it's a reminder of that. So taking that sensory walk outside can be really helpful.
Building off that, because I know personally and I know with patients, exercise does a tremendous impact in improving symptoms of stress and anxiety. How's that connected to our brain?
Well, certainly it's helping work those stress hormones out of your body. So giving a place for that release. I mentioned earlier that if you're really caught up in an anxiety spiral, you might need a rescue technique. And one of those involves about 90 seconds, no more than 2 minutes, of incredibly vigorous exercise. Because typically when you are hijacked with worry and your heart's pounding, you can do hold a plank for a minute or two, or do a wall squat for a minute or two, or run as fast as you can in place for 60 to 90 seconds. And you will raise your heart rate. And your heart rate will go up, and then your heart rate will start to rapidly drop because you've stopped the vigorous exercise. And it will just shift all of a sudden. Then, because the heart rate's naturally coming down, it just kind of helps that whole sympathetic nervous system shift down into parasympathetic nervous system. So that's an example of using a brief, intense exercise to help get you out of that and work with your brain. You can also stick your face in ice cold water, and that will help as well to break an intense anxiety that you might be feeling at the moment. Yeah, exercise is one of those things that we tend to, in our culture, think, well, it's about looking a certain way. My body needs to look, I need to make my body smaller, or I need to make this part of my body bigger and whatnot. I'm always encouraging people to see it as, this is part of my management of anxiety. This is treatment. This is as important as taking medication. I need to move my body. I need to work up a sweat. And cardiovascular exercise is more helpful in the management of anxiety than weight-bearing exercise is, or working out with weights. Now, we need to work out with weights. We need to do both. But if you're I'm feeling really anxious, you will feel better if you get some cardiovascular exercise than if you just go pump some iron.
No, I think all that's great. And we know there's been many studies that have looked at exercise as a management tool to use to improve anxiety symptoms. That's why when I'm irritable, my husband leaves my running shoes out and I know it's time to go.
I love that. He's a partner with you
He's
in
a
that
partner.
process.
We are all together as a
Yes.
team and know what I need to do to make everybody else happy too.
Dr. Degler, if someone is listening today and is like, oh my gosh, this has set a light bulb off in me, I have a lot of this going on and I want to address it, is this something you would recommend they should go talk to their primary care doctor about? Can they, if they aren't thinking that they want to do medicine, but they want to work on these other things, can they go directly to looking for a psychologist, or who should they go to?
Great questions. I mean, your family doctor is usually always a great place to start, and they might have therapists that they can recommend for you. But I would encourage folks, there's some really great content that you can consume to help educate you. I have resources. I have a YouTube channel with a lot of videos about anxiety and explaining what's going on in your brain and techniques that you can use. They can go to Jennifer Degler Ministries and look for resources there. I also have on my website, I have a seminar that I do called Helping Your Stressed Out Brain Chill Out. And the audio recording of that, once the pandemic happened, I made it free and I just left it free. And so they can download that as an audio file off of jenniferdegler.com. If they go to the store, just type in like the word worry, and once you get to my store, and it'll pop up.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, so there are free resources, and you want to make sure when you are consuming content that you are consuming content from people that they are trained mental health professionals. They are trained providers.
Agree. Please listen to this because there's so many things out on social media now, and it is not coming from people that are trained in this at all.
So there's all kinds of wackadoodle stuff out there. So really do look at that person's credentials before you start consuming their content. And then, I always encourage people, if you're comfortable, you can ask your friends, do you have any recommendations of counselors that I might see? I know here in Kentucky, you can go to the Kentucky Psychological Association website, kpa.org, and they have a find a psychologist search function, and you can specify. They have all these search terms you can specify for all kinds of different things you might want help with, including anxiety and worry. You can put in your zip code, and it'll tell you, people that are near you. You can also go to your insurance. If you have insurance, you can go to the insurance website and search for providers in your area, or call them and ask them, do they have providers that are covered under your plan? And do see somebody that this is what they do. Now, I will tell you, a lot of counselors, we see a lot of anxiety. So it's incredibly common. So a lot of people will treat that, but I would encourage you to, find somebody that this is a lot of what they do, and they are up on the latest techniques, the latest research to help you mind, body, and soul heal from this.
Well, that's great. You have taught us so much today. I want to summarize a few things that I have taken from today. And the first was to just really stop and have reflection to decide, are you feeling anxiety, or do you have too much on your plate? And then if you do find that you have too much on your plate, two things. One is you need to understand that you're going to be disappointing people. And if you're not disappointing people on a somewhat regular basis, you're probably disappointing yourself. Mm-hmm. And so to deal with that, you need to schedule an appointment with yourself somewhere outside of the house and do your 4 Ds, which are to do it. Think about the things that only you can do. To delegate, think about the things that you can give someone else to do that's on your list. What can you dump? And then what do you need to detach from? So I think those are great things for all of us to run through. And then if you are dealing with a lot of worries, setting a worry appointment is a good way to approach that. The breathing techniques seem to help the most when you're at the beginning of a spiral of worry or anxiety, and then having some of those rescue techniques like the 90 seconds of intense exercise are good ways to help you get out once you've already been spiraling. And then check out some of these resources to find a psychologist or another therapist near you. I will put a lot of links to the things that Dr. Degler mentioned in our show notes. So if you feel like I want to investigate this more for myself, definitely check those out.
We want to wrap this whole show up as well as give a bridge to our next shows that are coming up. We're going to be doing a lot of heart health shows. Leading into that, we want to make that connection so you will also realize how important your mental health is related to your heart health. So we just wanted to bring up some of these points based off of the 2 shows that we've recently done talking about depression and anxiety and remind you that they are important for your heart health. So just a couple thoughts on some studies are we do know that people with depression have been shown to have increased platelet adherence, endothelial dysfunction, lower heart rate variability, and worse adherence to their lifestyles, making achieving better cardiovascular health harder. So paying attention to depression and managing it and seeking care for that is also going to help with your heart health, as well as we know depression is just an independent risk factor in general for cardiac events.
So another one is they've done studies looking at patients that have had basically the same amount of heart disease. They've had kind of the same number of blocked arteries or stents, and their heart function is about the same. The patients in those groups that have depression have twice as many heart events happen than the patients with the same looking heart that don't have depression. And so really understanding that depression in of itself, besides the actual physical makeup of your heart, can lead to more heart attacks is really kind of a shocking thing, I think.
Agree. And based off of today's show, knowing also uncontrolled anxiety and stress in your life can be increased risk factor for cardiac disease as well. So paying attention to our mental health is also important for our heart. So we just wanted to be sure that we get that message across. We have 3 shows coming up all about our cardiovascular health.
So we'll try a new habit this week, kind of based off of some of the things Dr. Degler was telling us about today to try to help with our anxiety and mental health. Dr. Degler, can you tell them what you want them to try this week?
Okay, so building on what you all suggested in your last podcast, that they get out and take a walk, is let's add in a little anxiety measurement and a sensory aspect to that. So here's what you would do. Before you take your walk, you're going to take what we call a SUDS level, which is subjective units of disturbance, SUDS. Psychologists earn our living coming up with things like this, acronyms like this. So it's on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is no disturbance or neutral, and 10 is the worst disturbance you can imagine. So before you take your walk, you're going to notice in yourself, you're just going to check in with yourself, how worked up do I feel, how distressed, how disturbed do I feel right now on a scale of 0 to 10. Just make a note of that. And then you're going to go for your walk, and you're going to do that sensory walk where you're not talking on the phone. You're actually just connecting with what's going on in nature. You're noticing, what do I see? What do I smell? What do I feel with my body? The sensations. What do I hear? All of that stuff. So you do that. You finish your walk, and then you take another SUDS level. Where am I at? Did you start out and you were at a 5 because you were ticked off because your kids were whining, right? And then your husband was like, well, wait, I wanted to watch this TV show. And and you're like, okay. So you were at a 5, but you come back. And again, we're practicing noticing. We can't change what we don't notice. We notice, okay, wow, like I'm like at a 2 now. That's reinforcing in and of itself to help encourage you to take another walk because you noticed I felt better after the walk. And I'm actually being a little scientific about it and taking a SUDS level. So there you go.
Love it.
We're doing an experiment this week. I love experiments. And don't forget to follow us, leave a review, and share this show. And we would love to hear if you have any ideas for future shows or topics that you want us to cover. Just be sure to text us, or send us a message at contact@thestartinggatepodcast.com.
See you next week.